Have a seat on your porcelain throne. It's time to talk some shit on the Powell movement.
Welcome to the Powell movement. I'm your host, Mike Powell, and I want to start this one off by saying thank you to all the people who reached out sending positive vibes, messages, and love my way. I was really hoping they would help influence some test results my wife and I were waiting on, but that shit didn't work. Fuck. I still appreciate the hell out of all the messages. Thank you. I did and I do feel the love from my village of friends and family, and from a lot of you, people I don't even know, and that's so amazing. While I would be happy to tell you exactly what's going on, I'm not ready to talk about all of this without breaking down, unfortunately. So my sharing will come over the next weeks and months. And while all of this is not happening to me personally, I wish it was, as it is so difficult to see my partner in life in so much pain. So right now, all I really want to share is that last week we went to the ER a couple of nights and we were admitted for a surgery that seemed like a total bad dream. And 1 week later, that bad dream has turned into a total fucking nightmare. We just learned our diagnosis yesterday, and we are processing everything as I record this intro. So while I don't want to share any more right now, as it'll make me lose my shit, I do have a disturbing story from the ER that I'll share. So while we were in our little area in the ER, there's a dude next to us who's violently kicking his hospital bed. The nurses keep coming in to try and stop him, and the guy is yelling at them to give him some opiates. The nurse is like, nope, we can't do that, and then the kicking starts all over again. A few minutes later, we overhear a doctor say to this guy, "We've treated you for all the STDs, you tested negative for HIV, but we're going to need you to come back in 3 days and test you for HIV again because it's probably not going to show up the day after all this has happened." And then the doctor leaves and the kicking starts all over again. Then the dude starts yelling that he wants fentanyl, and he wants it now. He's screaming that he smokes 2 grams of fentanyl a day. And if he doesn't get it, he's going to leave the hospital, go down the street, and get some himself. During all of this, my wife is in total pain, but this drama, while it's sad, is a good distraction for us. So she asked me to open the curtain so we can see this guy and what's going on. He was still in his area with his curtain around him, so we didn't get to see him. And he starts yelling some more, but this time he yells some really disturbing stuff. He's yelling, "I was raped 15 times last night. I need some fucking opiates or I'm going to leave here to go get some." And we are just like, oh my God, I can't believe this shit. And then he runs out of his area and we see him for the first time. And while he does look kind of like a street person, he also looks like he could kind of be a bro with a beard. He's not tattooed at all. Because we see him, I think he's only wearing boxers. And he doesn't look as fucked up as we were expecting. Then he ran into the bathroom across from us and he started yelling the way you would think someone was yelling when they were trying to shit a boulder out of their ass. The nurses see us taking all of this in and they move us into a private room. Now you would think, since we were in a private room, we would be away from all this drama in the ER, but that wasn't the case. There was a 25 or so year old addict who was hitting her cane as hard as she could against the wall next to us while screaming, "I'm gonna hurt myself." There was some crazy shit going on in that emergency room, and I can't imagine working in a place like that. It was so crazy. And that was our emergency room experience. I'm sure there's going to be a lot more for me to get off my chest in the coming weeks and months, and I'm probably going to use this intro as therapy for me. But who knows what's going to happen? My goal is to keep the podcast going, and that's going to be a challenge, but I'm going to make it happen. I always do. So while my personal life sucks right about now, I hope yours doesn't, and I hope you're getting stoked because the season is close. And if there's anything that can make problems go away, it's snow season. And I hope to be able to get some days on the mountain this year to help forget about all my problems, but who knows what happens. My problems, I think, are more important than anything, and I think anybody in this situation realizes that. I am just starting to realize it. It is crazy that I'm having to process all of this right now, but that's fucking life, and it throws you some weird shit, and right now, it's my turn to deal with this weird shit, me and my wife, and we're gonna fucking fight the shit out of this. But the snow has started to fly. MSP was in town this week. I missed it. TGR's been in town. Level 1's been here. Solomon. Red Bull's premiering their snowboard flick. I forget what the name is. Absinthe has a tour, but I don't think they're coming to Seattle. So there's a ton of movie premieres going around all over the country. And I highly recommend you going to see one of these in person because seeing these movies on the big screen is what it takes to really get you fired up. Sure, it's awesome to see them on your computer screen or on your TV, but when you see it the way that the filmmakers want you to see these movies, it really is game-changing. So please support the movie makers and the athletes. And now with everything so close to happening, it's time to start thinking about getting your gear ready for the season. I'm sure all the ski swaps are starting to happen, but I don't want you to go to a ski swap. I want you to buy stuff from my amazing sponsors But also, if you're heading out in the backcountry, you're going to want to buy a product from my guest this week. Bruce Edgerly, Edge as he's known, is so many things. He's a dirtbag kayaker and a backcountry skier, an Ivy Leaguer, an entrepreneur, and an all-around rad dude. And while he's written for Powder, Larry Flint, and many others, he's known for being the co-founder of BCA, Backcountry Access. And his story is kind of like the Steve Jobs story, but for those that want to venture out into the backcountry. I really enjoyed talking with Edge, and I think you're going to enjoy listening to our podcast. Before we get into it, I want to ask you to please share this podcast on social media if you like it, and tell a friend about the show. Both of these things really do help the show grow, and that's what I'm all about, is getting more earballs on this podcast, growing it and telling these stories and building a collective history of these sports, and I think I'm doing it every week, and I want more people to hear it. Finally, I really want you to check out my sponsors' ads and buy their products. I only work with the best brands in the business, and they are Stanley, Elon Skis, Peter Glenn Ski and Sports, Outdoor Research, and the 10 Barrel Brewery. Now, it's time to talk to Bruce Edgerly. So you grew up outside of Boston, and it seems like life was all about hockey and skiing. Where did the family start skiing?
We were lifers at Wildcat Mountain, New Hampshire. We were members of this lodge called the White Mountain Ski Runners, and there'd be 55 people up there, like 10 families. It cost $250 a night per person. It was awesome.
Nice. And it also sounds like you're a pretty serious hockey player. And at the prime of your life, when you're living in Boston and you're skiing on the weekends in New Hampshire and you're playing hockey and you have all these friends, your parents uproot the family and move to Miami. Does that just kill you as a little kid?
Yeah, there was a recession back then, and my dad needed a job. So, yeah, it was a major disruption to our family. My older brother refused to go, so he stayed up there and lived with my uncle. Yeah, and then it kind of led to some family discord. So, yeah, they sent me away to school because I turned into a bit of a bad seed.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you're 13 or so when you get down there, and that causes you to rebel because you have to leave everything that you know. And you make some bad decisions. Like, what kind of shit were you getting into in Miami?
Well, it wasn't really bad shit. It was more like my relationship with my father.
Oh.
Yeah, and his relationship with my mom and alcohol and, that kind of thing.
Gotcha. So you get shipped out of the house and you end up going to Holderness Academy. And it's a ski academy where a lot of people go to get better at skiing, or it's not just a ski academy, but that's one of the things they do there. And when you think about Holderness back then, were you excited to go to a school like this and get out of Miami, or was it just something that your parents forced you to do to get disciplined?
I was just totally stoked to get out of Miami. Yeah, that school was perfect for me. We had an outdoor rink. There was a little ski hill and a jump, which are now closed. Like at the time, I didn't really appreciate it, but now I look back and it was like the turning point in my life.
Yeah, I mean, how does that place develop you as a person? Because when I think of Holderness, I think of a lot of elite people that go there because there's a ton of families that have money that send their kids to Holderness. And does it put you with just a whole different class of people that are going to go on to be really successful in life and they just become your friends?
Yeah, except back then it wasn't really a tier 1 kind of school. It was a little bit more of what you'd call a bohemian prep school where there were a lot of kind of hippie kids, I guess you'd say. So it wasn't really kind of an Ivy League feeder school. A lot of people did go there, and they got really good at skiing. Doug Coombs went there.
Doug Coombs got kicked out of there, right?
Yes.
What did he do to get kicked out of Holderness?
Oh, probably smoked a bunch of pot. Yeah, a lot of people got booted for that.
Yeah, it sounds like the whole 77 class almost got kicked out. Was that a whole bunch of pot smoking as well?
Yeah. People used to build forts out in the woods and go out and party, and every once in a while, they'd get found.
And for you, staying in Holderness, was it like you tried to do well in school because the last thing you wanted in life was to be sent back to Miami?
Exactly, yeah. So I kind of worked my ass off. I did really well. The last thing I wanted was to get shipped back home. So, yeah, I ended up graduating pretty high up in my class and going to an Ivy League school.
I know, it's pretty incredible. I mean, it's not pretty incredible. You worked hard, you get to go there. But you go to Brown University and you play hockey at Brown for your first 2 years there. Is that something where they recruit you? Is it a club thing? What's Brown hockey all about?
No, it's D1. It's way over my head. It's really good. I ended up on the JV team, had a blast. And I'd end up on the fourth line if some varsity guy was coming back from an injury, ended up on our team for a couple weeks. But it was a blast, and that's kind of how I made a bunch of friends at the beginning.
So was hockey more important than skiing to you at that point in life?
Yeah, it was. But it turned out to be temporary. After my sophomore year, I decided to take a break from school, and I moved out to Alta, and I didn't play hockey for another 20 years. I got totally turned on to powder skiing.
And it's funny that you got turned on to powder skiing in maybe one of the worst winters that Alta's ever had.
Yeah, it was the winter of 80-81, and apparently that was only second to 1977 as the worst year ever. But I thought it was awesome. And I just remember skiing on this broken glass stuff, which now I know to be surface horror. And apparently that layer was just plaguing the ski area that year. And I remember High Rustler slid all the way from top to bottom.
Oh, dang.
I had no idea how big of a deal that was at the time, but when I look at it now, it's like, whoa, that's huge.
Right. And I'm guessing the time that you took off to go ski, that freedom was life-changing for you. Is that the reason you traded your hockey stick for the ski club?
Yeah, I did that in Alta, and then our whole crew that I ended up working there with at the what is now Alf's restaurant, we all jumped in a van and went up to Alaska. I got jobs up there for the summer, and just kind of met a bunch of people that were a lot different, a lot more kind of adventurous than jocks, I guess you'd say, and just kind of liked that lifestyle a little better than being a jock hockey player.
So you go back to Brown and you get your degree in environmental engineering. Thinking about you at this point, it's like there's part skier, there's part environmentalist, part adventurer. Are you kind of like that educated New England hippie when you move out to Colorado?
Yeah, I was probably a little bit on the idealistic side. I got a job in solar energy in Basalt. Believe it or not, I scored a real job there in that valley. But once I actually started working and it started snowing, I got restless. So I ended up getting fired from my first job out of college.
So it's weird because it sounds like on paper that everything is working out perfectly for you. You move to Colorado. You get a big boy job that's right in the field that you studied in college. You're in solar design, but you end up getting fired. What do you do to get fired?
Well, the winter of 1983-84 was gigantic. That was the year that Lake Powell actually went over the top of the dam that spring. That's how huge it was.
Okay.
And that's the highest it's ever been. And it started out huge, and it never stopped snowing that year. And I was stuck in front of a computer while it was dumping out. And I joined the local race league, and I was just having a ball. Unfortunately, it was during weekdays, so I would skip work to go racing and then go powder skiing, and then I'd show up late for work. That didn't work too well for my employer at the time. So that was it. That was the end of my engineering career.
And your next gig is not what most Ivy Leaguers do, and I'm sure your parents were super proud of you because you took more of a middle schooler's job. You were a newspaper delivery boy for the Aspen Daily News, getting people the paper before the lifts open, and then you could take advantage of that huge snow year. Was that the dream job of just being able to ski as much as you wanted?
Yeah, it was absolutely perfect. So I did that, I was done when the lift started. I was in line on the way up every day ahead of the crowds. And then at night, actually, I would go in and just do a little copy editing. And they would ask me to rewrite stories that came out in the Denver Post that day, to rewrite them with a different angle, and then we'd republish them the next day in the Aspen Daily News. So we would poach Denver Post stories and recycle them the next day. And that was how I got into the editorial side. So I wasn't just delivering newspapers. I do have a bit of some kind of writing DNA that I think I might have inherited from my mother, and I just took advantage of that, and they hired me as a writer eventually. In fact, my first gig was to cover the 1983 World Cup downhill at Aspen Mountain.
And is this a time when like Hunter S. Thompson is working at the Aspen paper, and do you know him?
No, I don't think he was in town at the time, but I'll tell you what, Aspen at the time was a little bit like Miami Vice, and I was the cops and courts reporter after a while, and man, there was pipe bombings and coke busts, and there was AR-15 murder in town, drug related, all that stuff. I had to cover. It was like as much news per capita as you'd find in a place like New York City.
So the writing was pretty exciting in Aspen at that point.
Yeah, it was. It was super stimulating. And yeah, I got to meet all the DAs and the judges and criminals and the defendants. And yeah, I learned a lot. And the deadlines were just brutal. I had to write 3 stories a day, 6 days a week.
Huh. And this is when words really mattered. I mean, there wasn't many places to get your news. The newspaper was the primary place where everybody got it in the morning. And when you're doing that in a town like Aspen, I don't think Aspen's exploded to be the super rich place that it is these days, although I'm sure a lot of wealthy people were there. But are you able to make good money being a writer at that point because the job was so important?
Yeah, it was okay. I mean, the cost of living there wasn't bad at the time. My brother lived there, and that's one reason why I went there, is I had a free place to stay for a while. But he bought a place in Old Snowmass for $100,000. I remember that year.
And it's worth like $3 million now?
5 acres. Yeah, I think he sold it for 4. But anyways, it was okay. And I got some employee housing right across the river from Aspen Mountain. So it was a good deal.
So you're right in town and you are living the life. And in the 1980s as a ski bum in Aspen, because you're a writer, you have a real job, but I'm guessing that you're a ski bum too, and all your friends are kind of dirtbags as well, is my guess. But what's the lifestyle like? Is it going out 5 nights a week and partying really hard and then up for first chair in the morning?
Well, the first few months were like that, but my lifestyle there was a little bit like Aspen Extreme, where I forget their names, but there was the 2 guys.
Dexter Ritegi or whatever?
Yeah, one of them was like doing blow and always entertaining gals in the apartment and having a ball out till 3 o'clock. I was the other guy.
Okay.
The guy that I was actually working and was a little bit responsible. So that was my buddy Joe Tyson. He was the best man at my wedding. He had to leave town. Half of his friends got thrown in jail. He was getting in deep doo-doo there.
And while skiing is the crown jewel of Aspen, how about your summers there? Is that when you start getting serious about kayaking and that becomes a passion and a lifestyle for you too?
Yeah. My parents actually used to race back east. So I got a kayak from my dad and started using it in Aspen and just totally took off on it. It was those big water years, 1983 and 84. So I really took a beating. I broke my leg the first year, blew out my shoulder the next year, but I've been kayaking ever since, so that's probably, almost 40 years of boating.
Is there more injuries for you in kayaking than on snow?
Yeah, very little injuries skiing.
Wow, you don't hear that often, but one of the people I believe that you met and became really good friends with on the water, that also became a focus of some of your future writing stories, was Dean Cummings. And were you tight with Dean?
Yeah, Dean and I were super tight. I met Dean, I guess, spring of 93 or something, down on the Rio Embudo in New Mexico. And he had just come down from Valdez, and he told me about this event I've never heard of, the World Extreme Skiing Championships. And he kind of turned me on to it. So I started looking into it, and I ended up going up there with him the next year, and I got an assignment to ski in the comp as an embedded forerunner. And Dean and I had roomed together, and we had a ball. I mean, it was like kind of a life-changing trip for me. But Dean and I did that several years, and he would come down to Boulder and stay with me and work on his catalogs for Valdez H2O guides, because we used the same graphic artists and this and that. Yeah, I was kind of sorry to see what happened to Dean. I kind of miss him.
Yeah, I got a chance to meet him once at Camelback on a miserable East Coast day, and he seemed like a really, really intense dude, but that was just my hour around him. How would you describe him as a person, at least back then?
He was a super nice guy. I mean, remember he took my baby son Stu out for a bike ride one day for a couple hours, and yeah, he was smart on the river. We did a bunch of boating. I'm not sure what happened, but he was a completely different person after maybe 10 years.
It seemed like a whole bunch of drama went on in his life. He put a lot of stuff on YouTube where he'd go on these insane rants, and there was definitely some mental illness going on. I don't know if it was CTE, it was drugs, or whatever. I have no clue. But one thing I do know was that Dean was a pioneer of the whole extreme movement and the Heli movement in Alaska. And since you knew him, I'm sure you heard about all the drama behind the scenes in what will be known as the Heli Wars, I guess. And before we'll talk about the Beacon Wars in the podcast, can you describe what the Heli Wars were all about back then?
Oh man, that was so awesome. You know, that first trip I did to Valdez, all you had to do to get on a helicopter was pay $35 or so for a little poker chip that you'd hand Chet Simmons, the helicopter pilot, and he'd just bring you wherever you wanted at the time. It was so loose. But then, yeah, Doug Clune started up his operation, and then Dean started one up, and then Theo Miners started one up. And so it got kind of competitive between those guys, and there was some turf wars, even spilling over into Cordova with Kevin Quinn's operation, Points North. And, you know, Dean was he was stubborn at times. So he rubbed a lot of people the wrong way, including, I think, the Forest Service and his competitors and his employees. Yep. I think that was kind of the beginning of his downfall, was the stress that came along with those heli wars and just the stress of operating a heli ski operation. So many logistics and so much risk.
Yeah, and we're not here to talk totally about Dean. We're going to talk about you getting the holy grail of jobs in the ski industry, because while you were writing for the Aspen Daily News, you eventually get assignments for Powder magazine. How do you get your first assignment with Powder, and what is it?
Well, let's see. I got a little editing job at Rocky Mountain Sports and Fitness here in Boulder. And I remember a story came in from Les Anthony. He was the editor of Powder magazine at the time. So I got to know Les through that. And then I said, well, gee, I could write some stuff for you guys if you wanted. So I think I got a couple of little pieces up front in, like little ski areas that rock. And I think I wrote something about A Basin because that's kind of our home area here. And then it snowballed a little bit. I got an assignment to go up to Valdez with Larry Flint's new extreme sports publication called Over the Edge magazine, which lasted for like 3 months, but it was enough to get me up to Valdez. And I did that one story, and it came out great. And I sent it to Les, and he said, wow, you should just cover the whole series for us next year, which I did. Those guys flew me all over the world to cover the 1997 extreme skiing series.
Now it's time for my first sponsor break, and I'm going to start things off with Outdoor Research. I love this brand, and everyone knows that you won't get better designed and functional gear for all conditions. I mean, it's been designed and tested right here in the Pacific Northwest, and for over 40 years, OR is and has been known for making the best gear on the market. But the OR I'm working with today is so much different than the brand that sponsored the show 5 years ago. While they still have the best materials and the most talented designers, now the fits are totally different. I was able to get a sneak peek of what's coming out in the near future, and it's game-changing. OR now has something for everyone. The park kid, the resort skier, the backcountry rider, and the serious mountaineer. And I like the gear they have so much for off the hill that I can't wait to get my hands on it. I'm stoked to have OR back in the mix, and even more stoked on how the new product looks. It's a refreshing change that you're going to be able to see really soon when you head to an Outdoor Research dealer or head on over to their website, outdoorresearch.com. My next sponsor is Elan Skis, and I'm in love with my ripsticks. They are so fun and lively, all while remaining light and stable. And there's something different about skis designed in the Slovenian Alps by real skiers. And what's really amazing is that they built a solar power plant on top of their state-of-the-art factory. And Elan let me know that this independence from fossil fuels, along with the new solar plant, will provide a carbon sink as powerful as 15,000 trees on an annual basis. So not only will Elan skis make you a better skier, but they are putting their money where their mouth is when it comes to the planet. To find out more about all things Elan and what they're doing with their factory, head on over to elanskis.com. My final sponsor this round is a place you can get your Elan skis, your rollerblade inline skates, and everything for your summer fun. Think wakeboarding, swimming, and so much more. I'm talking about Peter Glenn Ski and Sports, and they have been the one-stop shop for all your needs for over 60 years. And these days, if you can't get to their store, well, you still have the same great experience online over at peterglenn.com. The site has all the brands, all the products, and they offer free shipping on orders of $49 or more, a no-hassle return policy, and they price match any reputable shop on the web. So please support the brand that supports me, and check out Peter Glenn before you buy somewhere else. Those are my sponsors. Now let's jump back into the podcast. Getting back to Larry Flint before we go to 97, because that's the big year when everything's really exploding. But do you meet Larry Flint and do you see anything on the seedy side of the publishing? Or is it just a ski job for you and you get to go write about what you want?
I never did meet Larry Flint. I was working with one of his editors. But yeah, I mean, in case nobody knows Larry Flint, he was kind of a renegade publisher. You know, he owned Hustler magazine, which was a major porn mag. And I don't know, he owned some gun magazines and he was a full renegade. But paid okay, you know, worked for me.
That one only lasts a little bit, and then the next year is really the game-changing year. So when they start sending you around to all the extreme contests in 97, is that the year that you're forerunning these events?
I did that several times. 94, I actually got to forerun with Tommy Moe and Micah Black.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, that was awesome.
And when you get there and you're forerunning for the first time and you're in Alaska, because these are insane peaks that all these badass skiers that are the best in the world are going to be sending themselves on. But you're going there as a writer. I think you've referred to yourself as kind of the George Plimpton kind of guy who was put in for the Detroit Lions back in the day, and he got to play quarterback. You got to play professional skier forerunning this course with Micah Black and Tommy Moe, two guys who define the sports in their eras. And are you shitting your pants when you're on top of these lines?
Totally. Yeah, I was way over my head. Way over my head. But, you know, I would take the main drain, you know. I wasn't copping any air or anything. They just wanted to see what the snow was like from a distance. And, you know, I'd let Micah and Tommy hit the bigger lines.
Well, that was very nice of you to save that stuff for them. And thinking about how you're living your life at that point, are you living assignment to assignment writing-wise, and then you're just laser focused on skiing and kayaking when you're not writing something?
Well, I also did some construction. Yeah, I pounded nails between assignments. Yeah, I had to do something to keep the dough coming in. But I got a lot of assignments. I had a 2-year run, and yeah, it was just a great experience. But, I mean, it's not a long-term career option, really, for anybody but John Krakauer.
Right. But at this point, you know, you're this smart Ivy League kid who's funded this lifestyle of skiing and kayaking by writing and pounding nails here and there. And you're a kayak instructor at the Boulder Outdoor Center, and I think this is where you get invited to a birthday party that's going to change your life. Can you tell us about Bruno's 30th?
Oh, yeah. I kind of all started with my buddy Eugene Buchanan, who you might know. Huge. He does a ton of writing on skiing and kayaking.
Yep.
Paddlinglife.com is his website. Anyways, he said, hey, come on down to the Arc this weekend. I'm going to paddle the numbers, and we're going to jam. You know, he's a big musician. Then go to Bruno's 30th birthday party. You can meet my friend Bruno. So we did that. We went boating. We had a blast. We played some music. We went down to his 30th birthday party, and he gave kind of a heartfelt speech about how he had just finished the worst experience of his life, which was he started up a casino, and it failed on the first day.
How does it fail on the first day?
They just lost a ton of money, and their investors backed out or something.
And was it really called the Cracker Factory?
Yeah.
Okay. It just doesn't sound well thought out there.
Yeah, another issue was parking, and the big gambling operators came in pretty quickly into those two towns when they legalized gambling. Center City and Blackhawk. This was in Blackhawk. And I think it was just, I don't really know the details, but there was some discord in the investment group. So anyways, he said, I'm open to ideas. I'm unemployable. If anybody has any business ideas, I'm all ears. So I went up to him afterwards and I said, well, you know what? I'm kind of unemployable too. Maybe we should do something together. And he had a great idea. He came back a couple of weeks later and said, you know, I've been thinking about this thing that we saw over in Europe earlier this year when we were in St. Anton, the Securifix mousetrap contraption that people are using. And I think I can come up with a much better system. And since I had all these connections in the ski industry at this time, I was kind of his marketing and sales guy. And so we started the company together, and he was in production. I was in marketing and sales. It's a great partnership.
Is it one of those things where you get it and you see his vision right away? Like you guys are going to create the best way for the serious alpine skier to access the backcountry with this tool, the Alpine Trekker? Or did it take a lot of selling from Bruno?
No, I was super skeptical because, At the time, the only way people were backcountry skiing was on Tele gear here in North America. Nobody was alpine touring because AT bindings at the time were rattle traps. They were terrible. Some of them didn't even release. And people weren't skiing rowdy stuff at all. It was just meadow skipping, except for Lou Dawson and his 14ers project, which was super inspiring. In fact, he was the first person I ever went alpine touring with, and he totally turned me on to it. That was on Mount Hayden outside of Aspen. But anyways, I told Bruno, I don't know, man. I just don't think that this thing is going to work in North America. I don't think there's a market for it. And he said, well, that'll be your job, is to create the market for it. So I did. And it all started with this whole extreme skiing crowd, now called free ski.
Yeah, I mean, just based on Powder putting you into all these scenes, it's like you have all these connections where it doesn't matter what part of skiing that someone wants you to build, you know the right people to do it. And now you guys have this product that you guys believe in. And if you get it in the hands of the right people, you can build a category out of it. You know it's exploding in Europe, or it's doing really well in Europe. I don't know if you know that, but Bruno knows that.
Yeah.
Were you two Tele skiers at the time? Because when I think of Tele skiing back then, especially in like the early to mid 90s, it seemed like it was all about granola, early micro beer drinkers, patchouli, and the dead. And while I'm kind of exaggerating about that, who were you and Bruno as skiers back then?
Well, I was one of those people with the Peruvian hat, coming over the years. But he was totally sold on this Securafix thing. He never telemarked. He went over to Europe on an exchange program for school and skied in St. Anton with his brother, John, who was one of our original investors. And people over there were starting to use this Securafix thing to use basically their race boots and bindings to go uphill. And he was totally turned on by that, and he never was into telemarking. I was, but as soon as we started working on the Trekkers, I converted, and I was just completely sold again on skiing. I always felt a little bit handcuffed telemark skiing. You couldn't really shred as hard.
For sure. And then I read a quote of yours where you said that all the top skiers got their start on Trekkers. Shane McConkey, Doug Coombs, Seth Morrison, Dean Cummings, Kent Kreitler. These were all guys that we met in free skiing competitions that were purely resort skiers, and they got their first taste of the backcountry with the Alpine Trekkers and have since become icons of the sport. Was that pretty much your marketing plan with Bruno? Like, hey, I know all these dudes. All we got to do is make them product and we'll give it to them and we're going to own this market and create it?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. Dino was our first sponsored athlete. He was on the cover of our first catalog. He was on the box for the Alpine Trekkers and everything. Yeah, and Doug Coombs, I drove to his house from Vancouver, BC. I drove to Doug Coombs' house to show him a pair of Trekkers.
To get him in his hand so he could actually see what they were?
Yeah, and he was totally psyched on it. And then he said, I got this buddy, Scott Schmidt, that would love to see these things. So I drove down to Santa Cruz from there and showed it to him. And I got all these guys on them. Rob Gaffney was a big BCA supporter also, because we worked together at the Boulder Outdoor Center. And he got all the MSP guys stoked on it, because his brother Scott is, the main editor. Our motto was high performance backcountry skiing. So that's kind of how we separated ourselves from the Tele crowd like Voile and Black Diamond and G3.
Yeah, you weren't worried about lightweight as much as you were high performance.
Exactly, yeah.
But before you can even have this product and get it into the marketplace and seed all these people with product, you guys need to raise a bunch of capital to start BCA. And while you're going to be the marketing and sales guy, how are you going to raise the capital to start the company? Because I'm sure it cost a pretty penny to get that first production run done.
So yeah, we needed to pay for the mold. That was the most expensive thing. And the materials for the metal cages that would go on there. And we tried hard. We put together a pretty good business plan, and we went out looking for investors, and only people we could get on board were our families. Bruno got his mom, his sister, and his brother on board. They threw down some money. I borrowed some money from my parents, and it still wasn't quite enough. So we ended up getting 7 different introductory rate credit cards, 0 interest rate credit cards. And that's how we paid our suppliers. which actually turned out to be a great strategy because we had the bulk of the equity and we didn't have to sell any of it. So it worked out pretty good. We didn't pay ourselves for the first couple of years, which is why I kept freelance writing for a few years. But eventually we paid ourselves back and then some. And we bought out his family and I paid my parents back.
And what does production look like? Is this something that's happening in a garage with friends and beer and pizza, or is it more organized and corporate than that?
No, it was full on grassroots. It was so awesome. In fact, those, in my opinion, were the heydays of BCA. It was when we were building those Alpine Trekkers in Bruno's garage. We brought in all of our kayaking buddies. We even had a friend that, Euge and I did a big trip over to the Soviet Union to go boating one year. And one of those guys from that trip, Russian guy, was visiting us at the time. And we put him right to work for a couple of weeks building Alpine Trekkers. Boris was his name. It was so awesome. And then, we paid him real money because he needed it, but most of our friends worked for pizza and beer. Unfortunately, we did one last round of field testing right before Christmas of 1994-ish, and all of our parts were breaking. So we had to basically stop shipping right when the season was at its peak, right around Christmas. And it was a rough beginning. For some reason, I guess we hadn't heat treated the parts well enough. We used to heat treat the metal parts in Bruno's oven in his kitchen. Yeah. His wife Val wasn't too stoked about it. Every once in a while, she'd be pulling some brownies out of the oven and there would be a heel climbing post down on the rack somewhere. So apparently we hadn't cooked them well enough and our first big production run failed and we had to redo the whole thing. And, it's just the typical learning curve situation that you hear about. A grassroots operation like that.
And eventually this thing takes off. And I think it takes off for one reason because of the way you sell it. Is it true that you're just in a truck going all over the country, dealer to dealer, athlete to athlete, just putting this thing in people's hands, getting it on their feet and selling it one by one?
Yeah, I did a 2-month road trip in my Tacoma and I just hit every single retailer. I hit all the major influencers, and I'd sleep in the back of my truck. In fact, I remember in the Mountain Gear catalog a couple of years ago, they wrote something up about how I had camped out in their parking lot when I first sold them the Alpine Trekkers. It was kind of fun to read about. Yeah, it was full on guerrilla marketing. That's when I visited Coombs and Schmidt and them, and it wasn't just retailers I was visiting, it was all the kind of important people in the industry. And it turned out to be just, an exercise in old school influencer marketing.
For sure. And I think it's something that if you have a great product that outperforms everything else in the market and nobody knows about it, and you're willing to spend 2 months going retailer to retailer and influencer to influencer, you're going to make a difference with your product if it performs like you think it does. And you guys were able to do that. The Trekker takes off. And you and Bruno are now product guys. You're making stuff to get out in the backcountry. And I'm sure you're constantly brainstorming on what's next. And you have a buddy, an electronics nerd named John Herford. I think you call him Herf. And you guys are sitting around shooting the shit one day. And you guys come up with the idea of a digital transceiver. Was that Herf or you guys, or who comes out with the idea?
Well, that was Herf's idea. He was a real whiz kid, a 40-year-old whiz kid. But I do remember we were on a hut trip, probably in 93 or maybe even earlier. Fowler Hilliard Hut in Colorado here. And we went out and we practiced with our beacons, which at the time, I think I had a Raymer. Nobody remembers Raymer, but he was actually one of our first competitors right here in Boulder. And then we had some Ortovox dual frequency, their F2s. And, you had to use an earphone and you had to walk around in a grid pattern and adjust the sensitivity control constantly. And nobody could pull it off. It was a complete fiasco every time we tried using these things. And I remember Herf said, I can do much better than this. I could design a digital beacon that would completely eclipse this technology. And he did. He worked on it for 3 years. And eventually we joined forces and we worked on the physical, the case and the harness. And we got all the certifications and wrote up all the manuals. So we were his first, I guess you could say, global distributor. He wasn't a partner in BCA and we weren't a partner in his company, which he called Rescue Technology, but we were totally integrated, and, we got a distributor margin. We'd buy the finished units from him and we'd sell them at wholesale, and we would get a margin that way. But eventually we ended up kind of doing a technology transfer from his brain into our brains, and we bought him out because he was in charge of production at the time, and we couldn't keep up. And then he couldn't do that and also work on development for the next generation. So we ended up basically buying the patent from him and adopting the technology ourselves. And then we used him as a consultant on development for the Tracker 2.
So he's pretty much designing all the tech. You're designing look and feel and function. And when you guys buy him out, is it an amicable thing where you guys are friendly?
Yeah. I mean, electrical engineers are a different breed.
Right.
They're not necessarily gifted in negotiation skills or social skills. So it was always a little bit awkward, but it worked out well for both of us, and we're great friends now. He got a nice royalty for the next 5 years, and he's been retired ever since.
Oh, good for him. Good for him.
Yeah.
Before this even happens, before the transceiver's built, you guys are testing prototypes of the Alpine Trekker in '94. It's like January 14th. And you're with a BCA investor. And take us through what happens on that day, because I feel like that's what kickstarts the whole creation of the digital transceiver.
So, yeah, that was a day of infamy for me. That was with John McGowan, who was Bruno, my partner's brother, older brother, who I play hockey with now. He's an awesome guy. And, yeah, he just gave me a call and said, hey, they're going to go up to Berthoud Pass today. It hadn't snowed in weeks. And this was in February, and there was a storm coming in, and we were totally jonesing to finally get on some snow. I should have known. It should have been a red flag to me, but I was pretty naive at the time. Yeah, and we got up there, and we were smart enough to do a transceiver check in the parking lot. And both of us, just like on that hut trip, we're fed up with these beacons. I had one of those ramers around my neck, and I said, I just don't trust this thing. So he had an extra Mortarbox F2 or something, so I put that around my neck in addition to the ramer as backup.
Not a smart idea.
No, it was pretty dumb because they were both transmitting. Of course, back then, nobody was aware of the issue of multiple burials and overlapping signals and this and that. So I went out there with 2 transmitting units around my neck. Yeah, and we got up there and it was blowing like hell. So I guess you could say we had kind of return to the barn syndrome, and we just wanted to get down off the ridge. And we were in this thing called Mines 1, which is a pretty notorious avalanche path with a big wind-loaded area at the top, and people have died in there. Yeah, and I dropped in, and the whole bowl ripped. I didn't see it. I just ended up getting thrown off my feet and just kind of somersaulting down for, it's probably 1,000 vertical.
Jeez.
And then there's a huge terrain trap at the bottom. So yeah, I thought I was going to die, man. I was totally freaked out. But I knew, I knew to swim and to put a hand over your face when it was slowing down and to get a hand up. And I had taken an avalanche course. And I ended up getting fully buried, but I did get a couple of fingers up above the surface. So fortunately, we didn't have to use those transceivers that day. John basically had to take his skis off because the thing slid to the ground, and he came down, and 20 minutes later he had me, and took another half hour to dig me out. But it was freaky. And then when I was buried, my whole throat was plugged with snow, and I still couldn't hardly breathe. And then I was thinking, well, I wonder if John's buried, in which case I guess we're both done for.
Right.
So yeah, it was super scary.
So super scary, and that's the catalyst to pushing this project forward, or stepping on the gas and making this thing move a little bit faster.
Yeah, I called her the next day and I said, dude, we need to get this project rolling here.
Now it's time for my second round of sponsors, and I'm going to start out with Stanley. And you know them as the brand that invented the category of keeping your drinks hot or cold. Stanley's the brand with that iconic green bottle that kept your grandpa's coffee hot all day long. Well, Stanley still makes that bottle along with so many other products. Think food storage, coolers and jugs, camp cookware. They have something for everyone's adventure, and it's not overpriced like the competition. Stanley takes pride in delivering what it always has, the best in quality at a fair price. And anyone who's used the product will tell you, nothing comes close to a Stanley. And for listening to this podcast, Stanley is going to give you the best discount you'll find anywhere. All you need to do is head on over to stanley1913.com, go shopping, and when you check out, enter the code DRINKFAST. That's all one word, all lowercase, at checkout, and you will get 30% off your entire order. If you spend over $75, I'll throw in a limited edition Powell Movement beanie. My final sponsor is the 10 Barrel Brewery out of Bend, Oregon. Since 2006, 10 Barrel has been brewing the country's best beers, and they don't stop with just beer. Between their cocktails in a can that feature real hard A and they pack a punch, their clean line seltzers, which I've been drinking a ton lately, and their Profuse Juice IPA and Pilsner, which are my go-tos when it comes to their beers, I can't get enough 10 Barrel. And I know they have some flavors that you're going to love as well. You just need to try one. So next time you're at the store, please pick up a 6-pack of 10 Barrel and support the beer that supports more in ski, snowboard, and bike than anyone else out there. To find out more about the beer, the athletes, the events, and all things 10 Barrel, head on over to 10barrel.com. Those are my sponsors. Now let's jump back into the podcast. To get that thing rolling, though, I'm sure with every product that you make or every new product, it's not like you guys are rolling in cash at this point, and I'm sure every new product needs a huge injection of capital to get things to the finish line. How do you raise money to create the tracker?
Well, that was Herf's money. I'm not sure where he got the money.
So you didn't have to worry about that one.
Yeah, but it was a guerrilla operation on his end. I mean, he had one other guy, this guy by the name of Mike Bond, who did the software. And it was not easy. Yeah, it was a real struggle for those guys. It cost Herf his marriage. I don't know where he got the money, but he pulled it off. And, we bought those things from him, and he got a nice little margin. So he recovered quickly. I mean, it took off.
Yeah, it takes off, and it officially starts the Beacon Wars. And while we talked about the Heli Wars a little bit earlier, can you please describe what the landscape of the market was and what the Beacon Wars were?
Yeah, well, at the time, which was, 1996-ish, Ortovox had come out with their Ortovox F1, their single frequency, that light blue transceiver with the new frequency, and it was just completely dominating the market. They had something like 80% market share worldwide. And then, we were a couple of nosin borders, nose pickers coming out of nowhere from their perspective, and we completely disrupted the market, and they lost their market share almost overnight. And they were pissed. It didn't help that the distributor in the U.S. was, a bit of a New England curmudgeon. Big Patriots fan, used to love to hassle him about that. And yeah, he was very outspoken, and, we didn't back down. So yeah, there were several outbursts that were witnessed at certain events over the years, and yeah, it became known as the Beacon Wars between us and Ortovox mainly.
And you guys really just did not like each other.
No, we did not. We had completely clashing cultures. They were very aggressive, kind of curmudgeonly, not friendly. And meanwhile, we had hired Steve Christie as a rep and eventually as our sales manager. Steve's like super warm and friendly and outgoing, and everybody loved Steve.
Yep.
So it was a bit of a cultural war as well, just kind of warm and friendly versus aggro. And let me throw in a little disclaimer. I love those guys. Now, they've hired one of my favorite touring partners of all time, Greg Mears. They hired one of my favorite retailers of all time from Neptune Mountaineering. So they have a great crew now. They have this guy over there, Dieter, that's super fun. So the whole thing has changed, and the Beacon Wars are over.
But when the Beacon Wars were going on, I'm not to say that people had a reason not to like you guys, because like you said, you had Steve, who's such an awesome guy. You can't not like that guy. He's so great. But while you guys had a superior product, it seemed like you guys made a lot of cocky claims out of the gate. And it seemed like those cocky claims ended up pissing a lot of people off. Would that be fair to say?
Well, yes. So, yeah, I guess I should take some blame there. I was mainly the source of that. Yeah, we came out of the gates pretty rambunctious because we knew we had a really hot product, and we didn't quite say it this way, but people were getting the impression that we were claiming you didn't have to practice. You always need to practice with a transceiver, but we were kind of implying that you didn't have to practice as much. And then I kind of pissed off the world at a Canadian Avalanche Association meeting when we first came out with that thing. They tested it. The BC Ministry of Highways owns hundreds of transceivers. So they did a big study and they completely reamed this tracker. They weren't used to it. They were trained on analog transceivers. They didn't get it. And I didn't go up there and train them. And I should have. And I should have gone up there and gotten their opinions before we even designed the thing. But, after this guy, Nick Seaton, presented his report at the CAA, Canadian Avalanche Association meeting, I stood up it was super embarrassing. I stood up on my chair and I said, hey, look, we didn't design this thing for you people. We designed it for the other 95% of the world that doesn't get paid to practice every day. And that shot was heard around the world. The Canadians have a very thorough intranet system. I mean, even back then, they had some way that they would communicate avalanche conditions to each other. So any kind of controversy that starts in the beacon world starts in Canada because of this kind of close-knit guiding community there. And they're tight with the Europeans. So for the next 3 years, I was doing repair work. It probably cost us a couple of years' worth of sales, and it totally set us back in Canada.
But it sounds like in Canada, there's a guy, Steve Conger, and he pulled you aside at one of these meetings, and he has some marketing advice for you, or for anybody who's making a transceiver, really, but you guys take it to heart. And what's the advice that he gives you that helps you win over maybe the Canadian market?
Yeah, so Steve Conger, he's both. He was here working for the Utah Department of Transportation. He's now Canadian. He works up there. He's actually been a consultant to ARI as their technical director for avalanche education. But anyways, I went to an American Avalanche Association meeting not too far after that fireball of an experience in Canada. And he came up to me afterwards and said, dude, you need to tweak your whole outlook and start talking about education rather than product. And he said, the first company that does that is the first company that's going to win the beacon wars. So I took that to heart. He's a smart guy and he's been around for a while. He knows the global scene, not just Utah or Calgary. He knows the whole scene. So yeah, we kind of changed our tune after a while. We started putting out ads that were strictly educational. We had this ad campaign with a chalkboard called Transceiver Searching 101. We explained what flux lines were and how multiple antenna beacon works, and kind of started from scratch and just tried to re-educate people from the ground up on this technology rather than kind of beating them over the heads. And it worked.
And that helps you win over, I guess, the North American market. But does it take even longer to win over the Euro market, who's used to heavy, big beacons that probably cover twice the distance of what you guys are offering?
Yeah, so over in Europe, we had a similar report that came out. This one was done by ICAR, the International Commission on Alpine Rescue, and the Swiss Avalanche Federation, a couple of pretty heavy-hitting organizations, and they had basically the same findings as the Canadians, although theirs was more about receive range rather than multiple burials. So we had to fight that. But eventually, once we started recruiting some really die-hard distributors who did kind of what I did with the trekkers, they just basically went man to man, door to door, and got these things in people's hands. And they were able to turn the tide for us, especially in Austria. We had a guy, Franz Hohensen, who was a UIAGM guide, and he hit all the search and rescue teams. He started hitting all the retailers. It just got them out and got them in their hands, and people saw the light, You have a tracker DTS in one hand and an old Barryvox VS2000 analog brick in the other. It was kind of a no-brainer. Maybe not to somebody who's been using an analog beacon for 20 years, but for the other 95% of the users out there, it made a ton of sense. So, a couple years later, we were actually number one in Switzerland and Austria and France, thanks to just guerrilla marketing in Europe.
And hiring the right people. It's getting people that have the shared vision that you have and the work ethic that you have to go sell that product and get it in all the stores, it sounds like.
Yeah.
You win over the Euros, you've won over the Canadians, and when you think about in North America, in the States especially, validation comes quickly here, I would think. And the first huge moment for BCA being validated was when Jackson opens their gates and they go all in with the tracker. When you get a win like that, how do you take that win and leverage it into a marketing story that you can sell the whole country on?
I must say we didn't really exploit that so much because you never know what's going to happen. Well, for instance, when we shipped them their first batch of trackers, there was an issue with them. There was some static electricity buildup that eventually would short circuit the unit. You know, they got the very first batch of our Tracker 2s, and since it was our first batch, we caught it immediately. We stopped shipping the Tracker 2s until we figured out what the issue was, which they uncovered for us, which was awesome. And we adjusted our production techniques to eliminate any kind of static electricity risk. But, you know, things like that can happen all the time. So you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. You know, I've never been a big fan of having one athlete that speaks for the whole brand, you know.
Sure.
Because, I mean, I don't know. Look what just happened at K2 with Pat Moore. He was their Top Gun athlete last year, and now he's gone. So you never know what's going to happen. So we've never done that kind of marketing. We've always done more of an educational approach. And all of our ambassadors have pretty much come from the ground up, where people have kind of come to us saying, man, we love this thing. We want to work with you guys.
And that's the sign of a great product, when people are asking you for it and they want to be a part of it instead of just taking your money, which is a great place to be. And I guess that one of the things that you do hang your hat on, and any, I think, transceiver company who has a great story like this would, is the first live recovery that you have. And what's the story around yours?
Yeah, that was awesome. We were waiting for that to happen for years. But finally, I forget what year it was, but there was this kid up in northern BC, Quesnel, BC, snowmobiler, 15-year-old who got a tracker for Christmas. And he hadn't even had a chance to really practice with the thing yet. He knew how to turn it on. And he did that. Anyways, he was snowmobiling just a couple days later, and one of his buddies got buried 5 feet deep. And he busted the thing out and got it into search mode and tracked down the signal and dug his buddy up and saved his life. And we got a call, or a letter, I guess it was, from his mom thanking us, which is still framed in the front office at BCA. We actually have a whole bulletin board with letters like that. Totally keep our staff fired up.
Yeah.
You know, it got published in the paper up there. And yeah, it was really kind of a turning point. And ever since then, we've celebrated whenever we have a live recovery like that. You know, we'll post something in our break room and maybe have a little pizza party or something.
How many lives do you think you've saved with the tracker?
Well, you know, I'd say now we get probably almost a half a dozen of those emails and phone calls a year.
It's amazing.
And, you know, there's probably a bigger percent that don't tell us. So I'm going to say it's on the order of hundreds. That doesn't include airbags. We've had an equal number of calls and letters from people whose airbags have saved them or their family members. And then you never hear about the ones where people weren't buried. Like, you never read about the success stories, you know, in the avalanche forecast center reports and stuff. So there's a whole subset of success stories that it's unfortunate people don't hear about except for us.
Right. And you bring up airbags, and that's going to be the next big category for BCA to enter. And in the States and in North America, it didn't seem like many people were wearing airbags except for sledders, and they didn't really care about the weight or cost. So they were getting them from Europe and paying whatever it costs to get them here. But they were a pain in the ass to fill or to recharge, and everything was a pain in the ass around airbags at that point, it seemed like. How did you guys know that airbags would be huge in the U.S. if you built them correctly?
Well, you know, the snowmobilers are kind of the canary in the coal mine. You know, they're the first indicator of a trend. And because those guys are smart, they're super practical, and they're not cheap. You know, they're like, generally speaking, snowmobilers don't mind spending money. So if there's a trend, they're going to be the first ones to adopt it no matter what the price is. And we saw them starting to buy these airbags from ABS out of Europe. And we were already pretty deep into snowmobiling. And one thing we've always had an advantage over our competitors is with the fact that we're in North America. And in North America, snowmobiling is huge. And in Europe, it's illegal, more or less. So none of our competitors saw that happening. We did, and we ended up going full on offensive on snowmobiling. And when we saw these airbags starting to come in from Europe, we knew that there was a big opportunity for us to make something lighter, easier to use, and more affordable. Just like we did with the Alpine Trekker versus the Scurifix, and just like we did with the Tracker DTS versus the Ortovox F1. It was the same approach. We took an existing product category and we North Americanized it, I guess you could say, or we recreationalized it and made it more accessible to the masses, which is kind of part of the meaning of backcountry access. It was kind of a double entendre on, yeah, we make stuff to help you access the backcountry, but we also make stuff to help stoner recreationalists access gear without paying a frickin' fortune.
Okay. And speaking of a frickin' fortune, the airbag packs are expensive to make. I mean, the lead times are huge and they were getting longer at this point. And there wasn't enough money, I feel like, that you guys could get loaned to build these packs. And is this when you start securing loans against the equity of yours and Bruno's houses?
Yeah, so, we never really had a ton of luck getting any sustainable financing. It was always based on the value of our inventory. They would loan us 50% on the value of the inventory we actually have in stock. Because, theoretically we could sell it and get money from retailers.
Right.
Or they would give us 80% of the value of our receivables. So stuff we've shipped already that people owe us money for. They would loan us 80% of that amount. But in order to have that inventory, we had to buy the materials and we had to pay a factory to do the cutting and sewing. And we had to pay our employees to do the assembly. And there was a huge gap there. And yeah, we had to basically bridge the gap with the equity in our homes. Fortunately, Bruno and I both owned homes at the time. Not when we owned the Trekkers, but once the DTS got off the ground and we had starting the float bags, that was 10 years in. Fortunately, the value of the real estate in Boulder has just gone through the roof.
Sure.
And we had equity. So that's how we bridged the gap.
And that's got to be a scary thing whenever you're putting your personal home on the line. Do the employees of the company know that that's how deep you guys are going to fund this dream of a product and company that you have, is that you're going to put everything personally on the line? And does that make everybody more invested when they realize that their owners are all in like that?
No, I don't think people knew that. We kind of kept that to ourselves. But it got super stressful, and people could see the stress between me and Bruno, actually.
Like your friendship was suffering?
Yeah, it kind of got to our friendship. We also had to sign personal guarantees, so it wasn't just our homes. It was anything we owned, basically. If the loans didn't get paid off, not only do we lose our homes, but we lose any kind of savings we might have, even our kayaks. So yeah, sometimes things would get a little heated when it was financing time. So, that eventually is why we started thinking about selling. It just wasn't worth what it was doing to our friendship and just the stress level.
And you had Black Diamond throwing an offer out at you that they want to buy you, and they threw a lowball offer at you. And when that happens, are you just like, fuck those guys? And then you see like a year later, they buy Peeps for a ridiculous amount of money. And you're like, wow, we got to sell now.
Well, yeah. Yeah, I've been listening to your podcast and I know you do your homework. So nice work.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah. So yeah, we did get an offer from Black Diamond, and we went and visited Peter Metcalf at his house. Absolutely loved him. He was awesome. I could definitely have worked with him, but we didn't like the majority ownership of Black Diamond that he had sold to. The offer was okay. It was, I guess it was a little bit lower than what we were hoping for. So between that and just the personality issue that we foresaw with these guys, we declined the offer. And then we hung on for another year or so. And then they bought Peeps and we saw what they paid for it. And that's when we said, okay, it's go time. And, Tim Petrick from K2 had been calling regularly every couple of years because they were doing this K2 backside line, but they didn't have a transceiver. But we were pretty stoked on what we were doing and the growth we were experiencing, and we didn't want to sell to K2. But now there was a little blood in the water. So I called up Tim Petrick and I said, hey, you guys still looking to get a transceiver into your lineup? And he said, hell yeah. And a week later, those guys flew out in their private plane and we worked out a deal.
So K2 ends up buying BCA, and you personally, or not you personally, but you and Bruno have built BCA into a 50-person company. And first, do people get rich when the company gets bought? I mean, do you guys make a pretty penny, and do the employees get paid as well?
Yeah, we did really well. Yeah, it was awesome.
Yeah, I love hearing a success story like that. You don't hear that in any of my podcasts like this, where when I'm like, did you sell? You're like, yeah, we sold, but we barely made anything. But it sounds like you're saying that with a smile and you guys did really well. The thing that comes without a smile, I'm sure, is that when you've built this company into a 50-person company, I'm sure it kind of feels like family at a point because you know everybody and have a relationship with them. And some people are going to lose their jobs because when a company like K2 comes in, they have this thing called synergy, which means other people lose their jobs to go to the K2 people who are already doing that job. How many people do you have to let go?
Well, first of all, yeah, the money we made was awesome and super exciting. Who would have ever thought you could make a great living in backcountry skiing?
Really? Yeah.
Never, ever thought that would come true, but it did. And we gave our key employees big fat bonuses. So we felt good about that because, Steve, Tiffany, all these guys, we shared quite a bit of it with them. So those guys were just as much a part of the thing as me and Bruno. But yeah, when K2 came in, they kind of cleaned out a lot of our back end stuff, like all of our shipping, accounting, and our mechanical engineering department. They dismantled, which was a little unfortunate, although that's where a lot of the strife was coming from at the time. Some of the tensions at the time before we sold were kind of coming out of the mechanical engineering group. So anyways, they brought the company down to more like 35 people from 50. It was unfortunate that we lost the shipping because, one thing about BCA that we've always put a lot of effort into is our customer service. We try to make sure that our customer service people are all super knowledgeable. We train the piss out of them. We put them through avalanche courses. They come to our rep trainings.
Do you lose those customer service people? I mean, does Joyce Miller start answering the backcountry calls?
Well, that's what K2 wanted to do. And that's one of the things that we fought tooth and nail to keep. And we have to this day. But we lost our whole tech rep program where we had guides and pros doing our clinics at retailers, and they were replaced with sales reps, which is fine now. Back then, the sales reps, they weren't backcountry skiers. They were alpine skiers. So the retailers didn't quite relate to them.
Sure.
But that's all improved. Oh, yeah, but, we lost our shipping department, and we were always really good at shipping stuff on time, and we, put little notes in, little thank you notes and decals and swag and stuff. But we lost all that when it went up to K2. And now we're kind of lost in their warehouse, and sometimes we are kind of lower priority to other brands when it's time to ship product and do triage on shipments. So that was a bit of a blow.
Which is crazy because if you think about it, since you've been in the K2 building, you guys created that BC Link radio that became the #1 SKU in all of K2's portfolio. So it's like you're still crushing it. And I think you're the fastest growing brand in the building since you've got there. So it's weird that you would be put on the back burner here and there every once in a while. But I get that K2 is the champion there. And when K2 is the champion and they buy a brand like BCA, how long until they're like, hey, we want the float packs to all have K2 logos on it. We want the beacons to all have K2 logos on it. Did they say that to you and you're just like, fuck no, that's not happening?
Well, yeah. The interesting thing was they kept the K2 backside line going for a year or two after they bought BCA. They came out with a whole lineup of airbags with the K2 logo on them. And as it turns out, we were outselling K2 10-1. And finally, that's when they realized, okay, yeah, this brand does have some clout. And they dropped their whole K2 backside line. And they're still trying to get rid of those old K2 float bags.
That's pretty funny that they still have any of those in inventory.
Yeah.
But in looking at the whole story, man, it's like BCA is the story of the American dream that you made happen with Bruno. And the way that I look at it is nothing happens without great people behind you. And one of those great people is the guy that came up in our chat already, Steve Christie. He's one of my favorite people in the whole industry. And he's the head of K2 Outdoor. He cut his teeth with BCA, and he will always bleed BCA. And he is the one that I've signed up to ask you inappropriate questions this week. I believe you know what inappropriate questions are. It's where I get a friend of yours to hopefully put you on the spot.
Oh, boy.
Steve has done so I'm going to play question number 1 from Steve right now.
All right, Bruce Edgerly, question number 1. I want you to think hard about this. Ample Annie.
Oh, God.
Ample Annie. Is she a friend or a foe, and why?
All right, well, I hope my wife Karen isn't listening.
I hope so, too.
Yeah, Steve, okay. I'll talk to you later. Yeah, so this was the first of several times that we've been threatened with lawsuits, I guess you'd say. We had a bachelor party when I got married in our warehouse. You know, we started in Bruno's garage, but a year or two later we moved into this warehouse building right next to the strip joint in North Boulder called the Bus Stop. And it's kind of a seedy part of town. You know, there was actually a search warrant on the floor when we moved in there. Boulder wasn't quite as bougie then as it is now. But anyways, we had my bachelor party, and it was organized by my buddy Mike Bader from the Boulder Outdoor Center Kayak School. And yeah, it involved some Crisco and some plastic sheeting on the floor and a couple of gals and some kind of game of Twister with me in the middle. And one of these gals was absolutely humongous. She probably weighed 300 pounds.
Oh, geez.
And she had boobs the size of melons, maybe watermelons. And it turned into a bit of a wrestling match. And the funny thing is, I already had a cut on my nose because earlier in the night, my brother had come in from Alaska and come in and just taken me down because wrestling is a big part of our whole family dynamic. I've got 3 older brothers. And he kind of got the best of me. I had a cut on my nose. And I got in this wrestling match with this Ample Annie, and she started getting the best of me. And, you know, I had learned a thing or two about wrestling from my brothers, and I did a reversal on her and threw her down on her back. And, you know, my nose was bleeding at the time because it had opened up from the match I had with my brother earlier in the night. And it just got really kind of nasty. And she tweaked her ankle, and she got really pissed. And it turned into a bit of a fracas. And she left the building saying, "I'm going to see you in court." Yeah, so that was my bachelor party. And meanwhile, my friend Mike had taken a bunch of Hustler magazines and torn the photos out of the mags and just randomly stuck them into our files. You know, like REI and Neptune Mountaineering file and this and that. Backcountrystore.com is what it was called at the time. And we had just hired a new employee, our first employee, Tiffany Von Essen. Every once in a while, she'd go into the files to look up some kind of credit application or something, and out would come this full-on beaver shot from Hustler magazine. She would just like completely freak out and turn all red. And she actually quit a couple of weeks into the job because of this and several other things. And Bruno came in and salvaged the relationship, and she became a lifelong employee, actually. But yeah, that's the story of Ample Annie.
All right, we're going to go into question number 2.
Question number 2. You can do it your way or the blank. Who said that, and what are we talking about in that moment?
That was Torbjorn Rag, and he was the director of marketing or something for Rodafella. We started importing. You know, we wanted to kind of take up our alpine touring business up a notch because all these people were using the Alpine Trekker as a bit of a gateway drug to get into alpine touring, but then they would go off and buy a pair of real AT bindings like the Fritchie Freeride or something.
Yep.
And we felt like we were kind of getting people hooked on this sport, and then they go buying stuff from other companies. So there was this company that came out, Naxo, out of Switzerland, that had these pretty cool AT bindings that looked like they were pretty burly. We were able to convince them to be their U.S. distributor or North American distributor. But the relationship got ugly pretty quickly because those things started breaking. Yeah, we had a huge warranty problem, and we actually took all the warranties and put them in a pile when those guys visited us from Switzerland, and we called it Mount Naxo, all these broken Naxo bindings. Well, then Rotafella bought Naxo, and we were forced to sell telemark gear, which we were over telemarking at the time, you know. But we're kind of forced to sell Rotafella bindings, and it just got really to be a real pain in the neck. And the guys in Rotafella were never happy with the sales because telemarking was dying at the time, thanks to us and Fritchie and everyone else.
Right.
Anyways, the motto was, there's the right way and the Norway. That was kind of how we felt about Rotafella at the time, is all their decisions were always in the complete wrong direction. So yeah, we had a bad taste in our mouth about telemarking ever since.
And I guess it's kind of maybe sort of making a comeback, but not really.
Yeah, we were the people that introduced NTN to North America, and that kind of maybe created a bit of new interest in the sport. And it was kind of fun because we had to go out and show people what aggressive telemark skiing was like.
Right.
So we actually got back into telemark skiing and got pretty good at it. But then the boots were breaking too. The NTM boots that companies were making to work with the bindings. So every turn we made, there was some kind of a issue. And it just became a huge distraction for us. So we were actually glad to get out of it after a while.
All right, we are going to jump into Steve's final inappropriate question.
All right, question number 3. Martin Franklin, the CEO or the owner of Jarden, came to purchase the company Backcountry Access for K2 Sports. You guys went up to Bruno's house and you deployed an airbag for him. In fact, he put the airbag on his body and deployed it. What came out of that airbag that day with, the guy that's like on Forbes' top 100 richest people in the world list?
Yeah, that guy was a real jet setter. Let's see, on Valentine's Day one year, our production employees played a little trick on me. They went over to Fascinations, the local kind of sex toy store, and they bought a blow-up doll, sex doll. And they put it in an airbag, and then they said, hey, we got this new prototype. And they pulled the trigger, and out comes this blow-up doll. And it's freaking hilarious. And we ended up keeping that thing and deploying it strategically at events. One of them was when Martin Franklin, this billionaire Wall Street guy, came to take a look at our company when we were selling. So we told him, hey, this is our next generation float pack 3.0. We want you to be the first person to deploy it. So we took out our video cameras and started rolling the film, and he pulled the trigger, and out comes this blow-up doll. The thing's right in his face. And he totally got off on it. So that's when we knew that we were actually a pretty good match. And we actually added a little clause to the sale contract when we sold it to K2, and that was that Martin Franklin was going to take us heli skiing for a week up at Micah heli skiing in Canada, and he was going to fly us up there in that private jet. Unfortunately, Jarden was sold a year or two later, and the new people didn't know anything about that, so we never got to consummate that part of the deal. But yeah, we've had that blow-up doll. We've had several new iterations. So we had one that I think you saw at a sales meeting once. We love our New Zealand distributors, so we pulled a prank on them, and that involved a blow-up sheep in net stockings. And who knows what the next generation airbag might hold.
Well, that's amazing, and that is Inappropriate Questions, and that's our podcast, and your story's an awesome one. It's like the educated ski bum who moves out west and made his ski dreams happen by writing for the most important publications in the business, all while keeping your ski bum roots and becoming an entrepreneur and getting rich. It's like no one ends this story in my podcast with selling and getting rich. Everybody sells and loses money, or sells and breaks even, or sells and it doesn't mean anything, but you actually did it. I'm going to credit that to your Ivy League education and the great company that you built. But I want to thank you for your time. It's an amazing story, and I really do feel like the whole thing It should be like a movie, just telling the dirtbag skier story of creating the safety item that everybody needs in the backcountry. So thank you for your time, and thank you for creating what you did.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Mike. Yeah. Maybe I'll write a book called Beacon Dog or something. Anyways, I love your podcast, and thanks for thinking of me, and hope to see you this season somewhere.
So that was Time with Edge, and what a cool story. My favorite part, as I'm sure you can guess, is that Edge made a lot of money selling his brand. When I think of people that sell, people like Jason Leventhal and Matt Sturbins, they never really made money. But I guess they weren't Ivy League smart either. I'm sure they're smart guys, though. I'm not trying to discredit them, and especially with what Jay and Matt are doing now. But Edge crushed it, and he made a ton of money. And it's really awesome to hear Edge's story, as I worked in his circle for years. And all I really knew about him was that he kind of reminded me of Shaggy from Scooby-Doo a little bit, and that he seemed like a really rad dude. But I never really got to know him. And after this chat, I realized he's just like all the other BCA people I've known over the years. A really awesome person who knows what they're talking about and lives the lifestyle. So it was really cool to talk with Edge. That's the podcast. I don't have anything else I want to add in this outro, other than, again, thanking you for all the care and concern. That shit means a lot, and it's crazy how I can get all emotional reading messages from a complete stranger. So thank you for the kind words. Thank you for listening every week. And please support my amazing sponsors. They are more important to me now than they ever have been, and I don't ever want them to leave, so please use the codes in the ads, go to their sites, and buy the products from these brands, because I only work with the best. And the best are Stanley, Elon Skis, Peter Glenn Ski and Sports, Outdoor Research, and the 10 Barrel Brewery. Have a great week, everyone.